The city was alive with lights and endless sounds, but inside the tall glass mansion on the hill, silence ruled the night. The billionaire, Mr. Jonathan Reed, sat in his living room, thinking deeply. To the world, he was a powerful man, someone who could buy anything with a single signature. But deep inside, Jonathan was a lonely man who trusted very few people. Over the years, he had seen how people pretended to care about him, only to get close to his money. It was because of this that he often tested the people around him, not out of cruelty, but out of curiosity to see who truly valued honesty and kindness. That evening, he was not in the mood for meetings, calls, or gatherings. He just wanted peace. The mansion staff moved quietly around, making sure everything was in order. Among them was a woman he had known for many years, Maria, his loyal maid. She was hard-working and humble, never once asking for more than her wages. Jonathan respected her, though he rarely showed it openly. Maria had brought someone with her that night, her young daughter Amara. The girl had big, curious eyes and a soft smile. Jonathan noticed her when she entered the house shyly, holding her mother's hand. Normally, children were not allowed in the mansion during work hours, but Jonathan did not mind this time. Something about the little girl's quiet nature made him curious. He leaned back on his couch, watching the girl from the corner of his eye as Maria arranged the room. The thought crossed his mind. What do people do when they think no one is watching? Do they still act kindly, or do they show their true selves? An idea formed in Jonathan's mind. He decided to pretend to fall asleep on the couch. Slowly, he closed his eyes and let his body relax, though his ears were sharp and his mind was wide awake. He wanted to see how the child would behave. Minutes passed. The air was calm with the faint sound of the clock ticking on the wall. Jonathan could hear Maria moving around, dusting the shelves, straightening the curtains, and carefully keeping everything in its place. Then, silence followed. He assumed Maria must have gone to another part of the mansion, leaving her daughter nearby. Through his half-closed eyes, he caught a glimpse of the little girl standing at a distance, watching him. She must have thought he was fast asleep. Her small feet moved carefully on the marble floor as she walked closer, curious but respectful. She stood beside the couch, her eyes scanning his face, then looking at the thick blanket that had slipped partly onto the floor. Jonathan felt his heart.
Stir.
Many people would have ignored it. Some might have even thought of taking something from the table or looking around for things they should not touch. But the girl bent down, picked up the edge of the blanket, and gently spread it back over him. She did not rush, nor did she make a sound. It was as if she truly cared for his comfort, even though he was not her father, not her relative, only her mother's employer. For Jonathan, that small act was more valuable than expensive gifts. It showed purity, the kind of innocence adults often lost when life became all about survival and wealth. He stayed still, but inside his chest felt warm. The little girl did not stop there. She noticed the glass of water on the side table, slightly far from the couch. She carefully lifted it and placed it closer to him, just in case he needed it when he woke up. After that, she folded her hands softly and whispered words he could barely catch. It was a prayer. She was asking God to keep him safe and healthy. Jonathan almost opened his eyes at that moment. He was deeply touched. This was no act to impress. She had no idea he was pretending. She believed he was asleep, and yet she wished good for him. He thought of his own childhood when life was simpler. Back then he had no wealth, no grand mansion, only his parents' love and the small house they all lived in. His mother used to cover him with a blanket the same way. The memory hit him so strongly that he had to take a slow, deep breath to stop his emotions from showing. The girl then tiptoed back, making sure she did not disturb him. Jonathan could hear her soft giggles when she joined her mother in the next room. Maria scolded her gently, telling her not to wander, but her tone was filled with love. Lying on the couch, Jonathan thought about how rare such genuine care had become in his world. People who came into his life usually had hidden reasons. Business. Partners wanted deals. Friends wanted favors. Even relatives sometimes came only when they needed something. But here was a child, too young to even understand wealth, showing kindness without expecting anything. The clock ticked past an hour, but Jonathan remained still, lost in his thoughts. He wondered about Maria's life, how she raised her daughter, with such good manners despite her struggles. He had seen Maria leave late at night, tired from work, only to return early the next morning. He never once heard her complain, and now her daughter reflected the same pure heart. Jonathan felt a mix of guilt and admiration. Guilt because he often overlooked the quiet sacrifices of people like Maria. Admiration because he realized how strength and kindness could still exist even in the simplest homes. The night grew quieter. Outside, the city lights sparkled, but inside, the mansion felt warmer, not because of luxury, but because of a child's small actions. Jonathan knew deep down that this experience would not leave him. He was a man who always searched for lessons in life, and tonight, he had found one in the most unexpected way. As he continued to lie there pretending to sleep, he planned to reveal the truth later. For now, he simply wanted to hold on to the feeling of being cared for, not as a billionaire, but simply as a human being. The mansion remained quiet, as though the walls themselves were listening. Jonathan lay still on the couch, his breathing steady, his eyes shut. He had already seen something that surprised him, a small child covering him with a blanket and whispering a prayer. For a man who lived in a world filled with business tricks and false smiles, that act alone was enough to stir his heart. But he did not move yet. He wanted to see what else might unfold if he remained silent, pretending to sleep. The little girl, Amara, returned to the room after a while. She walked slowly, her small feet making almost no sound on the polished floor. She carried something, clutched tightly in her hand. Jonathan could sense her presence before he opened his eyes, but he resisted the urge. He wanted to let the moment play out. Amara stood beside him once more. Her innocent eyes scanned his face as if trying to make sure he was really asleep. She tilted her head slightly, the way children do when they are curious. Then she knelt near the couch and opened her hand. Inside was a tiny piece of candy, wrapped neatly in bright paper. It must have been the only sweet she had saved for herself, perhaps from earlier in the day. Without hesitation, she placed it carefully on the table next to the water glass, whispering softly, "For when you wake up." Jonathan felt his throat tighten. He had dined in the finest restaurants around the world, tasting dishes prepared by award-winning chefs. He had a cellar filled with rare wines and cupboards stocked with imported chocolates. Yet in that moment, a small piece of candy placed by a little girl felt richer than any treasure he owned. The girl then folded her hands on her lap and sat near the couch. She did not touch anything else, nor did she act restless. Instead, she simply sat there quietly, as though keeping watch over him. The innocence of her presence reminded Jonathan of a forgotten time when people cared without expecting anything in return. After a few minutes, Maria entered the room, carrying a tray with folded clothes. She looked startled when she saw her daughter sitting so close to her employer. "Amara," she whispered firmly, "what are you doing here? Didn't I tell you not to disturb him?" The little girl looked up at her mother, guilt flashing across her face. "I wasn't disturbing him, Mama. He looked cold, so I gave him the blanket. And I put water closer to him. And..." She pointed to the candy, her voice soft. "I wanted him to have this when he wakes up." Maria's eyes softened, though her face remained serious. "That is very kind of you, but you must not forget your manners. He is tired. Let him rest." Jonathan kept still, though inside his heart was touched again. He could hear the slight tremble in Maria's voice. She must have been worried that her daughter's actions would anger him. She did not know that he was wide awake, carefully, listening, and that every word only deepened his respect for both mother and child. Maria gently held her daughter's hand and guided her to stand up. "Come, let's finish our work quietly," she whispered. But before they left the room, Amara turned her head once more toward him. She smiled softly, almost as though she was sending a silent wish his way. The billionaire's mind swirled with emotions. He had grown used to people rushing past him, always busy, always focused on themselves. But here was a child who thought about others before herself. A simple gesture, a blanket, a glass of water, a piece of candy, felt like rays of light in his otherwise guarded life. As the night continued, Jonathan allowed his thoughts to wander. He remembered times when he was a boy, living in a small house with wooden floors and simple meals. His mother always saved the last piece of bread for him, even when she herself was hungry. His father worked long hours, coming home tired, but never forgetting to smile. Those days had taught Jonathan what love and sacrifice felt like. Yet as he grew older and wealthier, those memories faded behind the noise of success. Tonight, however, they returned with full force, carried by the actions of a little girl he barely knew. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear Maria humming softly as she worked in the kitchen. The sound was gentle, filled with the warmth of a mother's love. Amara joined in with a quiet giggle, trying to match her mother's tune. Jonathan's lips curved into the faintest smile. It was rare for his mansion to echo with such pure sounds. Usually, it was silent, cold, and filled, only with the voices of staff giving updates. But tonight it felt different, alive. He shifted slightly on the couch, careful not to give away that he was awake. The blanket Amara had placed on him was still tucked neatly around his shoulders. He could smell a faint sweetness from the candy lying on the table. It reminded him not of wealth, but of childhood, the kind of joy money could never buy. Time passed slowly, and soon Maria called her daughter to her side. "We must leave soon," she said softly. "It's late." Jonathan could hear the quiet rustle of their steps as they prepared to go. He knew he could not keep his secret much longer, but for now, he wanted to stay silent and think. He thought about how often people judged others by their wealth, their skin, or their status. Maria and her daughter lived a life very different from his, yet in their hearts they carried something far more valuable than riches: kindness. That was what made them truly rich. Jonathan opened his eyes for a brief moment. When he was sure they were not looking, he saw Amara's small bag lying near the door. It was worn and patched in places, but she carried it proudly. Perhaps it held her school books or small toys. He wondered how many sacrifices Maria must have made to give her daughter even the simplest things. His respect for them grew stronger with each passing minute. When they finally left the room, Jonathan allowed himself to sit up. He picked up the candy from the table and turned it over in his hand. It was ordinary, nothing fancy, but it meant more to him than all the jewels he had locked away. Slowly, he unwrapped it and tasted it. The sweetness filled his mouth, but what touched him most was the thought behind it, the pure, selfless giving of a child. He leaned back again, his eyes glistening. For the first time in a long while, Jonathan felt that money was not the only thing that could make a man rich. Tonight, it was kindness, innocence, and love that made him feel wealthier than ever before. The night grew deeper, and the mansion felt like a place outside of time. Jonathan was still on the couch, pretending to sleep, though his heart was far from resting. He had already witnessed kindness that he did not expect. A little girl, the daughter of his maid, caring for him in ways that touched him deeply. First the blanket, then the water, then even offering her own small candy. These were not big actions in the eyes of the world, but to him, they meant everything. They were pure, honest, and filled with a warmth that he had not felt in years. As the clock ticked softly, Amara returned to the room once again. This time she carried a small notebook in her hands. She looked around carefully, making sure her mother was still busy in the kitchen, and then quietly sat on the floor near the couch. She opened the notebook and began to draw with a pencil that was almost too short to hold. Her little hands moved quickly, sketching lines, erasing, and then drawing again. Jonathan kept his eyes closed, but could hear the faint scratching of the pencil against paper. Curiosity grew inside him. What was she drawing at this hour? He wanted to peek, but he knew he had to keep up his active sleep. After some time, the scratching stopped, and there was only silence. Then he heard her whisper softly, "There. Now he looks happy." Her words made Jonathan's heart skip a beat. He wanted to know what she meant. Slowly, through his half-closed eyes, he risked a quick glance. On the paper was a drawing of a man lying on a couch with a blanket over him. Next to the man, she had drawn a big smile on his face and a small sun shining in the corner, as if to say the room was full of light. The child had drawn him, Jonathan Reed, the billionaire, but not as the world saw him, serious, powerful, untouchable. No, she had drawn him as someone who was happy and at peace. Jonathan quickly shut his eyes again before she noticed him peeking. His chest tightened with emotion. He had spent his life building wealth and power, but in the eyes of a child, what mattered most was a smile. The world saw him as a man of authority, but this little girl only wanted him to be happy. That simple picture carried more truth than all the portraits hanging in his mansion. Amara folded the notebook and held it close to her chest. She then whispered another small prayer, one that Jonathan caught clearly this time. "Please, God, keep him safe, and please let Mama always have work so I can help her one day." The sincerity in her words shook him. She was not only praying for him but also for her mother. Even in her young age, she was already thinking of responsibility, of helping the one who worked tirelessly for her. Jonathan thought of all the children he knew in his social circle. Many of them had every luxury, expensive toys, the latest gadgets, the best schools. Yet he wondered how many of them would think to pray not just for themselves but also for their parents and others. The sound of Maria's footsteps grew closer, and Amara quickly closed her notebook, hiding it under her arm. Her mother entered, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Amara, what are you doing here again?" she asked softly. The girl bit her lip but then smiled. "I was just drawing, Mama." Maria shook her head gently but did not scold her further. Instead, she touched her daughter's cheek and said, "You must let him rest. Come, it's time for us to go." But before leaving, Amara placed the notebook carefully on the side table, just beside the water glass. "For him," she whispered. "So when he wakes up, he will see himself happy." Maria sighed, but her eyes glistened with quiet pride. She did not stop her daughter this time. They both walked out of the room, their voices fading into the distance. Jonathan opened his eyes slowly. His gaze fell upon the notebook lying next to him. For a long moment he simply stared at it, hesitant to touch it. Then finally, he reached out and opened it. There, on the page, was the simple drawing of himself, lying on the couch with a blanket, a smile, and a shining sun. He ran his hand over the paper, tracing the lines drawn by small innocent fingers. A lump formed in his throat. For years he had been surrounded by business charts, financial reports, and contracts that spoke only of profit and power. But none of those papers had ever made him feel the way this little sketch did. It was not just a drawing, it was a reflection of how a child saw him, not for his money, not for his status, but simply as a person who deserved to be happy. He leaned back, holding the notebook against his chest. His mind wandered to thoughts he had pushed away for too long. Was he truly happy? He had everything money could buy, yet he felt empty inside most days. He realized now that happiness did not come from wealth, but from the small, genuine acts of kindness that came from the heart. The night air grew colder, but Jonathan felt warm inside. He closed his eyes again, not to pretend this time, but to truly rest, holding on to the gift he had been given. A lesson from a child. Hours later, when Maria and Amara quietly prepared to leave the mansion, Jonathan remained still on the couch, though his mind was wide awake again. He heard Maria reminding her daughter, "Don't forget your bag, Amara." "Yes, Mama," the little girl replied, "but I want to leave the drawing. Maybe it will make him smile when he wakes up." Jonathan had to press his lips together to stop himself from revealing that he was listening. The girl's voice, filled with so much innocence, had left a permanent mark on him. When the front door finally closed and the mansion returned to silence, Jonathan sat up fully. He looked around the empty room, his eyes falling once more on the small notebook. He picked it up carefully as though it were the most fragile treasure in the world. He smiled for real this time, the kind of smile he had not felt in years. Pure, unforced, and filled with gratitude. He whispered to himself, "Out of all the lessons I've learned in my life, this one is the most precious." That night, Jonathan Reed, the billionaire, realized that happiness did not need to be bought. Sometimes it came quietly, in the form of a child's prayer, a piece of candy, or a drawing with a smiling face and a sun in the corner. The night had already stretched long, but for Jonathan, time felt different. He was still seated on the couch, the small notebook with the drawing resting in his lap. Every time he looked at it, he felt his heart soften even more. It had been years since anyone reminded him of such simple happiness. He kept running his fingers gently over the pencil lines, thinking about how a child could see more truth than adults ever could. When he heard Maria's soft footsteps returning, Jonathan decided it was time to end his little act. He had been pretending for hours, but now he wanted to open his eyes and face them honestly. More importantly, he wanted to let them know what their actions meant to him. Maria entered the room quietly, holding her daughter's hand. She was ready to tell him good night, assuming her employer was still asleep. But when Jonathan slowly opened his eyes and sat up straight, both Maria and Amara froze in shock. The little girl gasped and hid partly behind her mother's arm. Maria's eyes widened, and she quickly lowered her head. "Sir, forgive us," she stammered nervously. "We didn't mean to disturb you." Amara was only being playful. "Please don't be upset." Jonathan raised his hand gently to stop her. "No, Maria. I am not upset at all." His voice was calm but firm. He looked down at the notebook once again before lifting it for them to see. "In fact, I am touched. Did you know I wasn't really asleep?" Maria's mouth opened slightly in surprise. She looked at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. Amara peeked out shyly, her small eyes blinking with confusion. Jonathan smiled softly and continued, "I was pretending. I wanted to see what people do when they think no one is watching. And tonight I saw something that changed me." He turned his gaze to the little girl. "Amara, you thought I was asleep, but I saw you put the blanket over me. I saw you move the glass of water closer. I even saw you place your candy on the table." The child's cheeks turned red with embarrassment. She lowered her head, gripping her mother's dress tightly. Jonathan leaned forward, his voice kind. "Do you know what that means to me? You cared for me when you didn't have to. You gave me something that was yours, and then you drew this picture of me." He raised the notebook again, showing the page with the drawing of him smiling under a sun. "This is not just a drawing. This is a gift from your heart." Maria's eyes grew wet with tears. She had not known that her daughter had done all these things. "Sir, she is only a child. Please don't take her actions wrongly. She doesn't understand the difference between rich and poor, employer and servant." But Jonathan shook his head. "That is exactly why it means so much. She doesn't see me as a billionaire. She sees me as a person who should be cared for, who should smile, who should be happy." His voice trembled slightly as he spoke the last word. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Maria held her daughter close, unsure of what to say. Amara finally looked up, her small voice breaking the quiet. "I just didn't want you to be cold. And Mama says when people are asleep we should let them rest and—" She hesitated, then whispered, "I prayed for you." Jonathan felt his throat tighten again. He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "I know, Amara. I heard you. And that prayer was the most valuable gift anyone has given me in a long, long time." Maria was overwhelmed. She had always taught her daughter to be kind, no matter their situation. but she never imagined that such small actions would touch a man of Jonathan's stature so deeply. Jonathan stood up from the couch, folding the blanket neatly and placing it aside. He walked toward them slowly, his steps echoing softly on the marble floor. When he reached them, he bent down slightly to meet Amara's eyes. She looked up at him, nervous but curious. He smiled. "Do you know what I want from you, Amara?" She shook her head silently. "I want you to promise me something," Jonathan said gently. "Promise me you will never stop being kind. No matter where life takes you, no matter what people say, keep this pure heart of yours. Because kindness is more powerful than money, more precious than gold." Amara nodded slowly, her little hands holding tightly to her mother's. Jonathan turned to Maria next. "And you, Maria, you have raised a remarkable daughter. You may think you live a simple life, but in truth, you are richer than many people. I know. You have given your daughter the values that matter most." Maria could no longer hold back her tears. "Sir, I don't know what to say. I only do my duty. My daughter is all I have, and I try my best for her." Jonathan placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "And you have done far more than your best. Tonight your daughter reminded me of something I had forgotten, that true wealth is not in what we own but in what we give. I am grateful to both of you." Amara looked up, her eyes sparkling now with courage. "Does that mean you are not angry with me?" she asked softly. Jonathan laughed gently, a warm sound that surprised even himself. "Angry? No, little one. I am proud of you. You have given me something that all the money in the world cannot buy." The tension in the room melted away. Maria hugged her daughter close, relief washing over her face. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt the heaviness in his chest lift. He had revealed his secret, and instead of guilt or regret, he felt peace. He looked once more at the notebook in his hand. "I will keep this drawing," he said firmly. "It will remind me every day that happiness can be simple, that it can come from the heart of a child." Amara's eyes widened with joy. "Really? You'll keep it?" "Yes," Jonathan replied, with a smile. "And I will treasure it more than any painting in this house." Maria wiped her tears and whispered, "Thank you, sir." Jonathan shook his head gently. "No, Maria. Tonight I am the one who should thank you both. You gave me back something I had lost, the feeling of being cared for." The night that began with a simple act of pretending had turned into something life-changing. Jonathan knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning of a bond that would grow stronger. As Maria and her daughter prepared to finally leave, Jonathan stopped them once more. His voice was steady, filled with meaning. "Tomorrow we will talk more. There are things I want to do for Amara's future, but for tonight go home and rest, you both deserve it." Maria and Amara left the mansion with lighter hearts, while Jonathan stood at the window watching them walk down the path. The city lights sparkled below, but he hardly noticed them. He held the notebook tightly against his chest, whispering, softly to himself, "Sometimes the smallest hearts teach the biggest lessons." The sun rose slowly over the city, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold. Inside the mansion, Jonathan sat in his study, unable to sleep much after the night before. He had spent hours holding the little notebook Amara left behind, opening it again and again to look at the simple drawing of himself smiling beneath the sun. Each time he saw it, he felt the same warmth, as though the picture carried a secret light that touched his soul. For a man who lived by contracts, profits, and careful calculations, this was unusual. But Jonathan did not want to ignore the feeling. He knew last night was not something ordinary. It was a moment that had shaken him awake, reminding him of truths he had forgotten. At breakfast, the mansion felt strangely empty without the soft hum of Maria's voice, or the gentle giggles of her daughter. Jonathan sipped his coffee, but it didn't taste the same. He realized he had grown used to the silence of wealth, but now, after one evening, that silence felt heavier than before. He called his personal assistant to arrange that Maria and her daughter come back that afternoon. He didn't explain the reason. He rarely explained himself to anyone, but he knew exactly what he wanted to say to them. When the clock struck 3, Maria arrived with Amara, looking nervous. Maria had her eyes lowered respectfully, her hands clasped together as if she feared her job might be at risk. Amara, on the other hand, peeked around curiously, still holding the small bag she always carried. Jonathan welcomed them into the living room. This time he did not pretend to be distant. Instead, he smiled warmly and gestured for them to sit. Maria hesitated at first, unused to such an invitation from her employer, but she obeyed quietly. Jonathan began slowly, his tone calm. Maria, last night was unusual for me. I have lived many years and I have seen countless people, but very few have touched me the way you and your daughter did. Maria looked up slightly, her expression unsure. Sir, I am afraid Amara was too forward. I hope she did not trouble you with her behavior. Jonathan shook his head. On the contrary, she gave me more than she knows. Amara showed me kindness that many adults forget. She reminded me of something I had lost, the feeling of being cared for without expectation. He turned to the little girl whose eyes were wide as she listened. Amara, you may think you only gave me a blanket, some water, and a candy, but those small things meant more than anything else in this house. The girl blushed, hiding her face behind her hands for a moment. I just wanted to help, she whispered. And that, Jonathan replied, is what makes it so valuable. He paused for a moment, then continued with a more serious tone. Maria, you have worked in this house for many years. I know your struggles, even though you never complain. You raise your daughter with honesty and strength. Last night I realized I cannot ignore that anymore. Maria's heart began to race. She wasn't sure where he was going with this. Sir, what do you mean? Jonathan leaned forward, his voice steady. I want to help Amara. I want to make sure her future is bright. She should not have to worry about school fees or opportunities. She has a kind heart, and that deserves to be nurtured. Maria's eyes widened in disbelief. Sir, I cannot accept charity. We are grateful for the work you have given me. That is enough. Jonathan shook his head gently. This is not charity. This is my way of honoring what your daughter has given me. Last night she reminded me of values money cannot buy. I am not paying you back. I am investing in her future because I believe she deserves it. Amara looked at him curiously. You mean, you want to help me go to school? Jonathan smiled. Yes, Amara. Not just school, but everything you need to grow, to learn, and to become whoever you dream to be. You should never have to feel limited just because life is difficult. I will take care of it. The little girl's eyes shone with excitement, but she looked up at her mother first, waiting for her reaction. Maria sat frozen, tears filling her eyes. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. For years she had worried about how she would manage her daughter's education. Each day was a struggle to balance work, bills, and food. She had prayed quietly, asking for strength, but never imagined that her employer would one day make such an offer. Sir, Maria whispered, her voice shaking, you don't know what this means to me, to us. I never wanted my daughter to feel small because of our situation. You are giving her more than I ever could. Jonathan nodded. And you have given her more than I ever had, the values that matter most. That is something no amount of money can replace. So let me do what I can, while you continue to give her the love that has made her the person she is. Amara couldn't contain her joy any longer. She jumped up and hugged her mother tightly. Mama, did you hear? I can study. I can really study. Maria held her close, her tears falling freely now. She whispered into her daughter's hair. Yes, my child, you can. God has answered our prayers. Jonathan watched them, a smile spreading across his face. For once, his mansion didn't feel empty. It didn't feel cold. It felt alive with love, gratitude, and hope. After they calmed down, Jonathan made arrangements. He called his assistant in and gave clear instructions. Amara's education would be taken care of in full: fees, books, supplies, even a tutor if needed. He also promised Maria better working conditions and a fair raise so she could live with less worry. Maria tried to protest again, but Jonathan silenced her gently. "Please accept this, Maria. It is not a burden for me, but it is the greatest gift you can allow me to give. Do not think of it as help. Think of it as gratitude." That evening, as they prepared to leave, Amara turned to him once more. She pulled something small from her bag. It was another piece of candy wrapped neatly. She placed it on the table with a smile. "For when you need sweetness again," she said shyly. Jonathan chuckled, touched beyond words. "Thank you, Amara. I will treasure this too." As Maria and her daughter walked out of the mansion that night, their steps were lighter than ever before. And Jonathan, standing at the window, watched them with a heart full of peace. He knew his decision was not just about supporting their future. It was about changing his own life too. For years he had been surrounded by wealth but starved of genuine human connection. In one night, a maid's daughter had shown him that the greatest riches were not in his bank accounts but in acts of kindness, innocence, and love. Jonathan whispered to himself as he held the notebook close once more. Sometimes the smallest gestures can open the biggest doors in our hearts. From that day forward, the mansion was no longer a place of silence and emptiness. It became a place where laughter, learning, and kindness grew, proof that one night, one child, and one act of pretending could change lives forever.